right, welcome back, guys. Hope everyone's doing well, staying warm out there, staying healthy. Yeah, welcome back to And One More Thing. This is where we discuss not last thoughts. I almost did it again. We talk about one more thing that stuck out to us in the sermon this past Sunday, and Matt breaks down the sermon and talks about one more thing that he wanted to add but couldn't because of time. I'm Paul Mente.
And I'm Matt Dixon. Hey, Paul, did you watch that Packers game last night?
No, I've not watched them this season because they're doo-doo.
Okay, well, if you didn't know something about Paul, is that he is not from around here. Are you, Paul?
I'm not, man. I'm not.
No, you're not a natural Southerner.
No, I wouldn't even consider myself an actual Southerner,
You probably feel like Titus in the island of Crete.
Wow, look at that.
How you feel?
That's right. Amongst all you
Cretans,
drunkards and liars.
yeah. Paul's from Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's right. I don't support my boys anymore, though. I just don't have time, sadly.
I want people to, as they listen to this and one more thing, to feel like they get to know us a little bit more. So there, they got a big takeaway. Somebody's going to come up to you on Sunday and be like, didn't know you were from Wisconsin.
Yeah. And I won't know how to react.
That's the value of doing stuff like that. Okay, so we're talking about Titus 1 through 1:10 through 16 is what we talked about yesterday. Called it correcting Cretans. I wish at near the end, I wish I would have just titled it "I have a bad feeling about this," and then did bad teaching, bad culture, bad lives.
Oh,
yeah, but it's all good. It came out in the intro.
Right.
Like I said, I prepared the sermon all week, but there's this deadline of getting the outline into the bulletin, and that is around noon on Thursday. But what happens is as I'm looking at it every day, so it's done on Thursdays generally, but it's developing still. And so that intro of "I have a bad feeling about this" hit me Saturday afternoon. And I was like, man, if I had the ability, I would go back and edit everything to fit around that "I have a bad feeling about this." But it's all good. Okay, so we had sinful teaching in verses 10 through 11. Titus on the island of Crete is dealing with insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers who are upsetting whole families by teaching what they ought not to teach. So we saw this unhealthy doctrine was leading to this unhealthy result of upsetting whole families. Then we have the sinful culture, verses 12 through 14 of the Cretan culture. They are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons, so therefore rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in the faith. So it's this hard fight over doctrine and over culture. But the result of that is so that people would be sound, healthy in the faith. And then finally is sinful lives. The sinful teachers were teaching this legalistic purity standard of do these certain things and then you can be pure before God. And then Paul's like, actually, the people who are saying that are completely dirty and they're false teachers, and to the pure, all things are pure. So if you have Jesus, don't worry about it, basically is what he says. And so that was the sermon, more or less. So Paul, what is one thing that stood out to you?
So my one thing comes in the form of a question today. Okay, so we're mixing it up a little bit.
Okay.
So you went into a little bit in verse 13. It is this testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in their faith. And you went into that sharp rebuke a little bit. And as I was sitting there taking it in, I kind of was questioning a little bit where the line is, right? Because I looked at this also in First Timothy. Paul is encouraging Timothy in chapter 6 to fight the good fight of faith. And he says here, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness. And and also I think there's other points to overseers to be gentle. Somewhere else, I think I might be wrong, but I don't know. But it's just kind of this idea of gentleness and being able to sharply rebuke somebody. And I was kind of interested in where the line would be, or what you think, when would you need to exercise a sharp rebuke, or when would you need to be gentle, or can they coexist? Right. So that's kind of my question.
Can they coexist simultaneously?
Yeah. Like, can you gently, sharply rebuke somebody?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would think, haven't had a ton of time to think about it, obviously, that it would rise with the seriousness of the doctrine and what's at stake in the doctrine. So if somebody comes up to me, we talked about creation at BGU on Wednesday, and if someone said, hey, I believe in a historical Adam and Eve. I believe in the special creation of man made in the image of God. I don't believe in theistic evolution, but I believe that the earth is 6.5 billion years old because of the gap theory. Okay, so, or whatever like that. I might say, hey, I disagree with you, but that probably doesn't rise to the level of sharp rebuke.
Right. Yeah.
That, or it could be something like a different view on the end times eschatology, or a better one might be like spiritual gifts. Okay, so you might have a certain opinion on spiritual gifts that might really require like some more biblical teaching, like, hey, I think you're out of whack here, let's really focus in on, and that'd probably be a gentle thing. That makes sense. Right. You don't need a short rebuke because somebody's confused about spiritual gifts.
Okay.
But if
do you think some of it has to do with like the harming of others? Because like in the context, he's saying that these false teachers are doing wrong to families and leading them astray and stuff. So it has to, you think, I guess not every case would be that way, but to the majority of them, it's like if they're harming someone else, you need to step in and stand up.
Let's say somebody was teaching in Sunday school that Jesus was a creation of God.
Okay. Yeah.
Would that not need a sharp rebuke?
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Like it's almost like there's no playing around with that truth. You see it in Jesus' life, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come, and you brood of vipers. I mean, he like dealt seriously with prideful false teachers, but then he was gentle with broken sinners.
Right.
And so,
that's a good point. I do
think that it has to do with like what's at stake. Is it an issue at the heart of Christianity? Is it going to upset whole families? And there could be something that isn't at the heart of Christianity that could upset whole families if you're just being divisive about this specific false doctrine. I don't know, but yeah, they were. I mean, the instance in Titus was they were teaching, hey, do these little bitty things, and keep with these food laws, and be circumcised and avoid sex, maybe, or something like that, and then you'll be pure. We don't really know what they were saying, but it would probably be things like that.
Yeah.
And Paul's like, you've got to sharply rebuke them because they're adding to the gospel.
Right. Okay.
There is that verse I read in Galatians 6:1 where it says, if anyone is caught in transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Mm-hmm. So that difference is, it doesn't seem like they are leading people astray. They're just falling into sin.
Okay.
And so then there's the spirit of gentleness. I think of 1 John at the very end. You're probably not there yet. Paul's teaching through 1 John and youth, where he says, if anyone sees his brother committing a sin not leading to death, he shall ask and God will give him life.
I did actually, I'm sorry, finish the verse.
No, you're good. What were you going to say?
I did actually quote that this past week because he was talking about, I was asking the question, do Christians sin? And so that right there kind of indicates that they do, because it was like, if any brother is caught in a transgression, so I did quote that one, but I'm not down to 1 John 5 yet.
There you go. Yeah. So I think it probably rises to like how much it's causing an issue
Mhm.
in the congregation, how dangerous it is, what's at stake. Because there is, doctrinal disagreements, which it's like, okay, this might need gentle correction, this might need some further discipleship. But also, there's some things that are just sin issues. It's not a doctrinal issue. You just be like, hey, what are you thinking? I do think there's a balance. You don't want to be like waking up rebuking people every day, all the time.
Right.
But
every little thing.
Yeah. But hey, there's a lot to rebuke. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
For sure.
Yeah. Where do you think there's another thing you want to add about where the line is, or do you have any thoughts there?
I don't think there's anything I want to add. I think the struggle that I had was trying to connect the two, because I feel like a lot of the time we're either overly gentle or we're overly rebukeful. I don't know if that's a word, but
harsh, sharp.
Yeah, harsh, right. So I feel like there's got to be a mix. There's got to be like a you gotta I'm trying to think of how to say it, but you can't lean too far on one end of the spectrum all the time.
Yeah.
And I guess, since both of these are kind of requirements, you need to use discretion in which, with whether you're gentle or whether you're strict,
Right.
I don't know. I guess it was just kind of it was a question of like, I felt like they couldn't exist at the same time,
Right. And it might be just different. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I was looking something up. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like maybe not all at the same time, but one or the other, depending on the situation. I was looking up Proverbs 15:1, where it says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Mm-hmm. I think in the context of relationships, the soft correction is probably better than the harsh rebuke.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Like if we had an issue, since we have a relationship, it'd be better for me to come in a gentle way.
Yeah.
So, it's almost like the public sin of the false teachers deserves this very public, harsh rebuke.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a great question. Send us your thoughts.
Yeah, there you go.
In the YouTube
We want your feedback.
Yeah, as we think these things through. Okay, I want to talk about one thing that stood out to me. And I want to double click on verse 12. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. This is, basically a stereotype. Paul's employing a stereotype of the Cretans, but it's a true stereotype. Okay, so it's like, here's what they said, and it's true. It's interesting to me that Paul quotes one of their own prophets. Like he's quoting a prophet of their culture. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own. So this is similar to me. Like if I'm trying to reach this culture, quoting Taylor Swift, as one of your prophets, Taylor Swift once said, shake it off. Okay, that's kind of like what he was saying. But I think it shows the wisdom of Paul. It reminds me of, what does it remind me of, Paul? Paul quoting a prophet of their own culture, Mars Hill, Acts 17, where it says, he says that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. So right there, he quotes Epimenides, okay, in Acts 17. Epimenides. But Paul does this to like sharply rebuke the Cretans. He basically says, y'all are objectively terrible people. Right? It's interesting. It's a wholesale criticism of the culture, which is so like, could you imagine doing something like this today for us to say, like, the people in Mississippi are all liars, beasts, and lazy gluttons. Everybody in Wisconsin, everybody from Wisconsin,
wow.
that would be just like so fly in the face of everything we're about. these days. Not the world's about. But I want to point out that Paul was not the only person to say something like this. Number one, a 3rd century BC source, so this is 300 years before Christ, claimed that Cretans are thieves from way back, pirates. They never think along legal lines. So that was 300 years before Jesus. Then I talked about the lexicon of Hezekiah of Alexandria. I mentioned this yesterday in the sermon. So this was like 5th century, but with older info. Contained the entry Cretan, which means to speak or act like a Cretan, or to play the Cretan, with the definition of to lie or deceive. So literally, you could be like, you're playing the Cretan right now, is the word that people would say, and it meant to lie. One historian said, so much, in fact, do love sordid love of gain and lust for wealth prevail among them, that the Cretans are the only people in the world in whose eyes no gain is disgraceful. Finally, Cicero said that Cretans regarded highway robbery as honorable. So, I mean, this is like over and over again. Like, Paul's not the only person saying that Cretan culture is terrible. I mean, everybody's saying this. Now, the prophet, I want to ask who the prophet he's quoting in verse 12. It's in the footnote of the ESV, just like the footnote was in the Acts 17, and it is Epimenides, the same dude from Acts 17.
Oh boy, again.
Yeah, so in him we live and move and have our being is from Epimenides of Crete. Paul quotes him in Acts 17, and Paul quotes him here in chapter.
Who was a Cretan too?
They're both the same dude. Yeah, Epimenides was a Cretan.
Oh,
and
okay.
Paul quotes him in the same. So Paul must have had this dude's books.
Right? I bet, yeah.
Paul had like an Epimenides section in his library, I guess. And so, yeah, this dude's from Crete. Paul quotes him in Acts 17 and in Titus chapter 1. And what Paul quotes from is this thing called the liar paradox. Very famous, what people talk about all the time. And it basically goes like this. If a Cretan, Epimenides, if a Cretan says Cretans are always liars, is he lying or telling the truth?
Wow.
See what I'm saying? So if he's telling the truth, then Cretans
aren't always liars.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's a little paradox, and it's kind of funny because Paul just kind of cuts through that in verse. Paul knew about this. He had to. Verse 13, this testimony is true. So it's like, is it true or is it false? And he's just like, hey, this testimony is true. Yeah. Y'all are full of deceit. Okay, that's basically what he does there, which is kind of funny to see that background of it and how he cuts through it. So what he says is, he says they're evil beasts as well, which is ironic because Crete was known as an island without a lot of wild animals. Like, it was known there wasn't a lot of wild animals there. So it's kind of like Epimenides was saying, and Paul, y'all are the wild beasts on Crete. And then lazy gluttons, which literally means idle stomachs. So just stomachs that are just sitting around doing nothing. Self-indulgent, doing nothing, only caring about themselves. It reminds me of Philippians 3:19, which says their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and their glory is in their shame, with minds set on earthly things. I mean, that's what the Cretan culture was. Their minds were completely captivated with earthly things, and everything they were was in direct contrast to what life in the spirit looks like. So let me ask you a question, Paul, since you asked me a question. That's Cretan culture. Very similar to our culture, I would say. Wisconsin culture and Tennessee culture. How do we respond to things like this? Like, how do we respond to that kind of culture?
To play off of, I guess, what we talked about earlier, there is an element of gentleness that we need to have for them, and compassion. I think something interesting is that Paul kind of learned these people. You mentioned how, he read Epimenides, and so he read about the Crete culture. And then on Mars Hill, he quotes them again, but he's trying to like relate to them in a way by knowing their culture. I think that's another good thing that we should do, be able to know them so that we have that empathy for them, you know what I mean, where we know where they're coming from, even though they might be wrong. We still need to come at them in that gentle kind of way, but also apparently in moments you got to rebuke sharply too. And so if they're profaning God in some kind of way, I think it's just to get a little rebukeful. I keep using that word now, but
rebukeful. Yeah, I don't know if that's a word.
I don't think it is, but you know what I'm saying. Does that kind of get at what you were trying to?
Yeah, I wanted to quote 2 Timothy 2:14 through 17, which I think is very similar to everything we talked about yesterday, where it says, remind them of these things and charge them before God not to quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. But avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. So what we saw yesterday is what we see in this passage here. Unhealthy doctrine produces unhealthy lives, right? I mean, it says irreverent babble will lead people into more and more ungodliness. Unhealthy doctrine, irreverent babble will lead to unhealthy lives. So I think the best thing that we can do is what we see in this text is to do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. So our response to irreverent babble, to unhealthy doctrine, unhealthy lives, is to rightly handle the word of truth. Because as we saw yesterday, healthy doctrine produces healthy lives. Because 2 Timothy, irreverent babble leads to more and more ungodliness. But as we saw in Titus chapter 1, verse 1, the knowledge of the truth, which accords with godliness. So the word of truth leads to godliness, and the irreverent babble, the word of falsehood, leads to ungodliness. So the way we respond to this unhealthy culture, unhealthy doctrine, unhealthy lives is rightly handling the word of truth.
Yeah. Very good.
You're speechless, huh?
I am. I'm blown away.
Blown away. All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week. This was And One More Thing with Matt Dixon and Paul Mente Jr. They didn't know that either, did they?
Didn't know that.